Welcome back, everyone. We have David Boyne. Over to you, Dave.
Cool, thank you very much. Quickly set my timer. Awesome stuff. Yeah, sorry about that. Wow, this is bright, isn't it? Event-driven architectures. So hands up if you're building event-driven architectures. SNS, SQS, EventBridge, DynamoDB streams, Kinesis, all this wonderful stuff. Awesome. For those who are not, this is event-driven architectures in one slide. Right? Beautiful. You have producers, you have a channel, and you have a consumer. Over the last 10 years, I've been diving deep into all of this. And the question I always have and ask myself is how can something so simple, right, end up so complicated in your architecture, in your organization? Discoverability problems, versioning, contract changes, boundaries, exposing information, ordering, retry handling, cap theorem, all these things and terminologies that you'll come across, and this complexity you will come across when you build event architectures. So, what are we speaking about today? I want to dive into some of these things, and I want to have a look about how we can navigate some of this complexity using domain-driven design. Quickly introduce myself, about me. I'm Dave Boyne. I'm full-time. I do like open source stuff full-time. And consultant. I used to work for AWS in the last 20 years, just been diving into startups and enterprises and left that whole world to do free open source stuff now. I'm a sucker for governance, tooling, standards, all this kind of stuff, okay? And it's great to be back. It's the third time I've been here, so it's awesome to be here on stage with you all. And what are we going to be talking about? So 3 main areas. First, I want to dive into warning signs of complexity in event architectures briefly and see what kind of things start to emerge and maybe resonate with you. Then we're going to be looking at a book that's 23 years old and see what things we can pick from domain-driven design to help us manage the complexity, okay? And then third, we're going to look at some open source standards, specifications, and things you can take away, hopefully, to help you manage some of this. Everything I speak about is at the end in the summary there. So, layers of complexity. First, let's start with the basics. Complexity, okay? People normally talk about 2 areas of complexity. Number 1 is essential complexity. There is no getting around it, right? Your domain, what you do in your organization is complex, okay? So like large bank transactions, whatever things you are doing, there's just no getting away. Now, as architects and developers, we love to spend most of our time here, okay? I'm a sucker for it. I do it myself too. Idempotency, right? Being able to retry events in your architectures, making sure there's no side effects. We also have like exactly once processing, retry handling, cap theorem, all sorts of things. That EDA, technically, is a very complicated subject. Now, most people I speak to stop here and focus a lot of time and energy here. There is another type of complexity that will come up and grab you, whether you like it or not. And often, this is not spoken about enough and not thought about enough. Examples being versioning, coupling, governance, discoverability, ownership, all these wonderful things that come out of nowhere before you know it and really screw things up. So, let's have a look at some examples of where this all happens. Back to basics. Event-driven architectures, right? Producer, channel, consumer. Now, AWS conference, your channel would be SQS, SNS, DynamoDB stream, whatever. You're transporting messages from somewhere to another. Now, the problem is, where complexity starts, I believe, is the SDK magic, okay? So here we have an EventBridge event. We are going to use the EventBridge SDK to chuck this thing onto a channel. Now, what happens here, most people now think we're event-driven, okay? We have consumers that come on board. They come in multiples, and we can just say, okay, we're going to produce this message, and consumers come and go, and we have a decoupled, event-driven architecture. Now, on paper, this looks beautiful. Right? So what happens next? Okay, well, now we have DynamoDB. Now we have streams and change data capture. Maybe we have other patterns emerging here. We have queues, dead letter queues. These things start to emerge. Now, us as architects and developers This is a beautiful diagram. We draw this on our whiteboards, in our lucid charts, whatever it is, and we pat ourselves on the back because we've done an awesome job. Other people in the organization look at your team and think, hang on, this is pretty cool stuff AWS is giving us, the giants, and we're leaning into them, and we build this architecture. So, what's the problem here? Well, what tends to kind of happen is all we've done is kind of built this distributed big ball of mud, right? And complexity is already started to leak into this design, whether you like it or not. At some point in the future, your developers will come up to you and say, what the hell have we built here, okay? And you see this time and time again. So in terms of domain-driven design here, all I'm talking about is these concepts of big balls of mud, unregulated growth. Well, your consumers can just come and go as and when they want, sure. You've got information that's shared freely amongst the system. What goes inside your events, no one really cares, right? Just chuck it onto EventBridge as an example. And lack of design of the system. Was it even designed in the first place? Because guess what? We can just call an SDK, and now we're event-driven architectures. So there's that problem. Back to basics. Again, producer, consumer, and a channel. What else? Where does complexity come in? Well, here is an order event, that the order has been placed. We are told and we are tasked to create an event, an immutable fact when something happens. We can do that. In fact, we have the order placed, we have the source, and we have the details. User ID and order ID. What more does anyone want? And then what happens is you evolve the events, and time goes on. Now we have an order cancelled event. We've done this before. We copy some events, some code, some SDK code, and we create the order cancelled event. Okay? This time we have some information in there. This time we have things like a reason, we have a type no one really understands, and we have a user object, and we have PII information in the event, but no one really cares because no one's really organizing any of this. So anyway, we publish this into the ether. And then what happens? Guess what? More events come on board. More events in your architecture. Here we have the payments, we have the orders. We have order updated. We start use CRUD-named things for our events. Why was the order updated? No one knows. Go figure it out. It's in the event payload, sure. We have invoice created, and we have send invoice email. Sounds like a command. Why are we using commands as events? Interesting. What happens over time, again and again and again, we've just created some big complex mess in our architecture. Your developers are screaming at you, thinking, what the hell have we done? And this is all just because of these accidental complexities that come into your architecture. This whole idea of YOLO events, just chuck anything on the SDK, sure. Lack of standards in your events, naming conventions, this kind of stuff, and exposing implementation details, what goes inside your events. No one really knows. Going to that question is the most popular question in event architectures. What goes inside our events? Now, what happens is you go online and you start to Google. You might come across some stuff I've done. Whoever, you start to learn. And what happens? You come across the notification event pattern. You decide we are going to send the order ID and the user ID. We have a simple contract here to maintain in the future. And your downstream consumers give you the thumbs up. Now, the thing is with this is how useful is the order ID and the user ID here? Who knows? So your downstream consumers will go and get this information from somewhere, but you don't really know because you don't really know who your consumers are. So it's questionable kind of pattern here. And also if you're using EventBridge, you can't do any kind of transformation or filtering because you have no data. So your teams and you at some point go along and say, well, we will do the opposite to this then. We will add everything into our events, the whole world into our events. Fantastic, this is awesome stuff. And as you can see, the downstream consumers are very happy with your decisions. They give you the big thumbs up here. And what happens here really is, well, one day the producer says, we don't want to put this information inside this event anymore. The producer has no idea who is consuming or what the hell is going on in their architecture. And then guess what? Lack of versioning, lack of standards, things start to break, okay? And again, all we have done here is we've created something that's beautiful with DynamoDB and SQS, dead letter queues, all this wonderful stuff, but in fact, we've just created a complex, big ball of mud. Your developers, again, are crying at the reams, thinking, what the hell have we done? Now, elements of this, lack of design, contract coupling in your events, all sorts of things. So complexity and accidental complexity comes in event-driven architectures. I cannot state that enough. Some of this might resonate with you. If you have none of this, I would love to talk to you, because I have yet to meet a company that does not. So, step back. Where does it all come from? Where does this complexity come from in this architecture? I believe it comes with an implementation-first mindset. The barrier to entry for event-driven architecture is low. It's an SDK call, it's a consumer, it's a producer, okay? When you take it at face value. And we have this implementation-first mindset of just, let's raise an event, let's get something working, let's get it out the door. And that kind of leads into this complex mess over time and complexity that will come and get you. So on the other hand, what can we do about that? What options do we have? And that's where I kind of like to talk about domain-driven design, right? What can a book, 23 years old-ish, teach us about event-driven architectures? And the answer to that is, well, quite a lot. So what we'll do now is actually move EDA to the side for a minute and actually open up this book and see what the hell is going on and what we can take. So inside domain-driven design, you have two main areas, okay? You have strategic design and tactical design. When you open up the book, you start to see these words come up, like ubiquitous language, the language in which you use in your domain, in your organization, the language that will probably end up in your events and your schemas, okay? We have domains, we have supporting, core, and generic. Core domains being what gives you that competitive edge in your organization, otherwise you probably wouldn't exist. Generic being something like Cognito, right? Taking authentication off the shelf because no one wants to manage authentication. Tactical design, on the other hand, first thing there, events. Events come up in DDD quite a lot, so there's a great synergy between DDD and EDA. You have dependency injection, repositories, aggregates, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. Now, I have 16, 17 minutes left. I have no time to talk about all of that, but what we can do is actually pick some of these and dive deeper and figure out how they can help you manage complexity, not necessarily get rid of it, just manage it. What I like to think about is two main areas here. Number one, developing a shared understanding of your organization and your teams is super, super important when it comes to the foundationals of event architectures. Number two is actually how we can use messages to communicate between boundaries. Now, let's talk about developing a shared understanding together. Now, what happens is, Dave in his keynote actually mentioned this. I've been there before, I felt the pain. That you have this like misunderstanding that gets released into production all the time, okay? So on the left here we have the domain experts. The domain experts, the business is what I actually used to call it, funny enough. But they want wheels, they want windows, they want doors, and everything else like this, okay? And what happens is this translation period somewhere in your organization, and the developers turn up and say, yes, we've got doors, we've got windows, we've got this stuff. Okay? And complexity is already sneaking in because now we have a bus. In fact, this bus represents models, represents code, represents things and schemas and events, all sorts of things. So, what does domain-driven design tell us what we can do to help with this? And the first thing they talk about is domain modeling and domain discovery, actually bringing people together, funny enough, actually talking to humans. I know it's a weird thing, we don't like to do that as engineers, but actually speaking to people and getting a shared understanding can help with a lot of the complex mess that we've seen. So how do we do that? Well, there is domain discovery in these practices about visual collaboration, team discovery, and a shared understanding. There are two main workshops I've seen with event architectures. Number one is event modeling, which you can do, and number two is something called event storming. And hands up if you've done event storming before. Cool, a few people. If you're not familiar, event storming is a workshop, and you talk about events and commands, and you can group things, and it's all basically post-it notes, chaotic. But the whole idea really is to map out a particular domain. Now, a lot of people ask me, we're not doing greenfield projects. We can't just run an event storming session for our event architectures. And it's not really about that at all. You can actually do event storming sessions to improve a particular part of your domain or your architecture, right, and bringing people in with this. You can envision new things, explore things, and design things. So you can use these workshops in various different ways. And those who are not familiar, what I want to do is actually walk through a basic example here of envisioning something. So let's say we are a company called Bright Path. Okay, we are an online learning platform that we want to build. We're going to chuck AI in there because now we have a valuation of about 50 million because we use the word AI with zero revenue. So we're off to a good start. So what we want to do now is actually start modeling, start exploring. So we use event storming, and the first thing we talk about is events at the core to this model. So here, for example, this is a chaotic exploration. We don't really talk to people. You have the domain experts in there. But you can see here we have these events. User creates account. Course has been recommended. All these things. You start to have duplicates in this session. Next thing you do is you move them into a particular timeline, a timeline that tells a story of your domain and what you're trying to do. So you can see here, most people can probably understand there is a narrative here. You can probably understand just on the events itself what is happening in the system. The next thing you do is you map commands on top of this. Now, if we take a step back for a minute, we're talking about events, we're talking about commands, we're talking about different messages. Again, event-driven architecture has messages. We have commands, things that can be rejected. Please do this, no thank you. We have queries, please get me the information. In your architecture, you probably already have commands and queries over HTTP, over REST, very popular. Also, we have events type of message, a fact, an immutable thing that has happened. So what we do with event storming, we go back and we start to map commands as blue, and we start to model this, that we have the actors is what they're called. We have the user is the actor in this scenario in the top left. And then as you can see here, we have the create account. Create account can be rejected. We start modeling the events and all this thing that goes on. Through this is the best time because what happens is there is conflict in the discussions. You're talking about what is a lesson, what is a course, what is a user, what is a customer. We get that shared understanding of the nuances of your system. No longer do you have weird things in your schemas and that language, is you can start to model these things. Conflict here is the best thing. So what happens next is you create hotspots, things you don't really want to talk about right now. You know, on-off, do we have an on-off flow? Let's come back to these things in the future. And then what happens is you start to create systems around these, auth0 as an example there, and we start to highlight. So as I said, you go through this exploration, you start to map out and get that shared understanding. Now what happens here naturally is another beautiful thing, I think, which is things start to kind of naturally fit together. Okay? We have groups that start to emerge in our diagrams, in our event storming session. Now, even if you just stopped here with domain-driven design, right, and just used event storming or modeling as an example, you are way better off than what you were, because the alternative is an implementation-first mindset. Right? It is an SDK call. It is just YOLOing and doing what the hell you want. And there's so much assumptions and complexity that comes into this that can just be managed by just doing some basic modeling, some workshops. So what happens here, we have our things, our groups of elements. And the question is, have we managed to beat complexity yet? And the answer, unfortunately, from a DDD point of view and from this point of view is no, we haven't at all. So let's keep diving deeper into domain-driven design. What else can we do? Well, domain-driven design has this concept of something called a bounded context. Okay? We can actually group these elements into areas of functionality. So you'll see here the definition is fulfill particular business responsibility. Okay? It's independent and it's loosely coupled. There's that word again. The word we always hear about event-driven architectures, we are loosely coupled. If you take a step inside of the boundary, you'll start to see these things in DDD that turn up. You start to see policies, entities, domain events, all sorts of things. And you can go super, super deep on this stuff. But what I recommend is just start with the basics. The best one I always find is just the ubiquitous language. Okay? What do I mean by this? Define the language in which is used in this particular domain. For example, a course, what is a customer, what is a user? These things are modeled into your schemas. To give you an example of this, you'll see here on the left, we have someone teaching you a lesson, right? And I'm from Peterborough. So if someone says, if you're in a pub and someone says, I'm going to teach you a lesson, you probably want to get the hell out of there before something bad happens. But it's the same kind of thing. The terminology, the lesson is used in different contexts, and that's exactly what happens when we start to model these things, is that these terminologies come up, the ubiquitous language comes up, and they're solid, solid foundations for event architectures. What happens if you take it a step further is you start to assign teams to these boundaries or teams to multiple boundaries. Now, the question is then, well, how the hell do we communicate between teams and boundaries? And luckily for us, this is where event-driven architecture comes in. We can actually use channels, SQS, SNS, EventBridge, Kinesis, Kafka, it doesn't matter, to communicate between these things. And the question you have now is, have we beat complexity yet? Are we loosely coupled here? And the answer to this, unfortunately, is still no, we are not. And that is because even how you consume your events, right, couples you directly back to something, okay? Even if you look loosely coupled, you are not. So, what can domain-driven design help us here? Well, luckily they have this concept of something called bounded context maps. Now, there is something important to know, that by default, when you consume an event from your producers, you are conformist by default. This is a pattern in DDD. A conformist means you are taking the model, the schema, and all of this stuff into your Lambda function, your container, whatever it is, into your domain. Okay? This might be okay, this might be fine. Equally, it might be terrifying, and you might not want to do this. By default, you are doing this, okay? So what other things can DDD help us to manage some of this risk and complexity that can even come in through how we couple? Is, well, the next thing they recommend is creating anti-corruption layers, okay? Taking that model, take that order, map it into something you understand as a team, right? And protect your domain, to protect your containers, your APIs, your Lambda functions, whatever the hell it is inside there. The alternative to this, again, in domain-driven design, is the open host service, pushing back onto the producer and telling them, no, we agreed a contract, you adhere to the contract, and that's what you will publish. Event-driven architectures, especially EventBridge, has some cool patterns. Things like dumb endpoint smart pipes, you'll see these words come up. The producer does what the hell they want, the consumer consumes what they want, but it's the channel in the middle that does the mapping. EventBridge does a good job of this, and I'm a big fan of this, but the problem is, who the hell owns the mappings? And these are things you have to think about and things you have to discuss before you go in full hog on this one. Other things, partnerships. You're in close proximity with people. I've done partnerships in the past. We agree a contract, you break a contract, I'm going to change my code. We are very physically close together, whatever that is. This is a good pattern or a bad pattern, depending on how you look at it. The other one, separate one, is separate ways. Duplication of events, duplication of things because they live in a different country or organizational structure, whatever that might be. There are different bounded context maps to help you in DDD with your event-driven architectures. Remember, you are conformist by default, so have a look and explore some of these. The question you might have is, Dave, which one do I use? Which one should I use? The answer to that, of course, it depends, but you can use the level of communication that you want. If you want high communication, partnerships are fine. If you do not want any communication at all, separate ways, anti-corruption layers. I even think there's a level of complexity that comes with a lot of this. The higher the amount of communication probably means the higher amount of complexity that will come in. Okay, so things to consider. So finally, does DDD help us manage complexity with event-driven architectures? I think it does. On the left here, you have this implementation first mindset, or you have this other thing. Now, the problem is here, have we completely managed complexity yet? And the answer, unfortunately, still is no. And this is a hill I'm willing to die on. There is a statement out there with EDA that is causing so many problems. And one of these problems is this, is that we are told that producers don't know about any consumers. We are told to just forget that consumers exist because they can come and go as and when they want because we are loosely coupled. Now, most organizations I chat to end up in a complete mess, okay, complex mess. So examples like, what events do we have? I have no idea. Go look at GitHub, right? That's not very useful. What's the payload of the events? I need to make a change to something. Who's consuming it? We have no idea, right? And I cannot state this enough, and again, something I'm super passionate about, is just create a thin layer of governance or something to help you manage complexity as you scale with your event architectures, because it will come and get you. Luckily, for us, there is open source tools out there and specifications. I don't have time to talk about them all. The two I highly recommend, if you've not looked at them, is cloud events. They are a specification that allows you to just standardize your message, not the payload, but the message envelope itself is worth looking at. Async API is a specification that allows you to just document machine-readable stuff. I have a service. I am sending these events. I receive these events. Oh, by the way, here's the schema. Sounds very familiar to an open API specification. Super, super useful. Now, the question I have and the passion that I have is why can't we combine the two worlds? Why do we have this business, DDD, whatever else, over here and create that bridge between them? And that's something I've been doing for the last 3 years, is actually trying to create something better to help people manage complexity in EDA. And that's why I focus a lot of my time and energy on an open source project. This is free MIT thing. You can use it for free, fork it, whatever. But there is a mess out there. I speak to hundreds of people at the moment in organizations, and everyone somewhere is struggling, but why can't we do something better? And with Event Catalog, it's just all about capturing language, capturing domains, capturing events, queries, commands, services, painting a picture, like event storming picture, where it just tells a story of your architecture. Why are we living in a world where we have to have this complex mess all the time? And even taking it a step further, why can't we take your SNS or take your SQS and event bridge things and actually use these primitives to actually design and talk about and collaborate with people? Why are we using post-it notes still? So this is something I'm exploring at the moment, but again, I'm just super passionate about helping people. There's another open source project here that I recommend looking at if you're into ubiquitous language, you want to capture what the hell is an order in your organization. Here's one from Chris Simon. Recommend looking at this so you can actually start to have ubiquitous language in Slack, in Discord, in Confluent, in whatever tool that you want. So you can start to actually understand and share these things. If you're a geek like me, we have over 1,000 people on Discord now, trying to solve this and people with this pain point. So feel free to kind of come along and join in the fun. I spend most of my time here. So to summarize this, right? It's yes, domain-driven design can help us manage complexity. I truly believe that there is a huge synergy here between DDD and EDA, right? Because the alternative is implementation first, and I can almost guarantee a lot of you are probably doing this and feeling, hopefully, some of them, not hopefully, but feeling some of this pain points. But I honestly think create a solid foundation, just a thin one, async API, cloud events, talk about something, a README file somewhere, just capture some of what the hell is going on, look at behavior first, look at domain-driven design, and just take elements of these and help you manage that complexity in EDA. It can go very, very, very far, okay? If you want to learn more, about event-driven architectures. I built this. This is a free book. You can download this, like 90 kind of visuals here, loads of different resources if you're interested in that. But I'm just super geek. I love this EDA stuff, and I think it's a fantastic thing. And with that, I think I'm at 30 minutes exactly. I'm Dave. You can catch me here. You can get the resources and slides and dive deeper. And there's also a 60-minute version of this talk on YouTube somewhere if you're interested. And I really appreciate your time just before lunch. Have a great conference. I'm here for the rest of the day if you've got questions. So thanks very much. Hope it was useful.
Awesome. Dave, thank you very much. Welcome back to COMSOM again.
Thank you very much.
I should have said.